This
Find my screen. Make sure this is happening. All right. Is everybody there? Can everybody see the screen? Colin, can you see it in full screen mode?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so our goal today, we are going to learn how to earn the right to ask questions. This is going to go on for today and tomorrow. We'll go for about 2 to 3 hours today. You're welcome to stay. You're welcome to leave. It will be recorded for those who've registered, so that will be available over time. And let's go ahead and jump right in. So the most important thing I want folks to know is that if we want to get better at anything, whatever it is, whether it's sales, life, success is gonna have to, you're gonna have to raise your standard to meet success. Success will not lower its standards for us. And it's really, really important. And I really want people to understand that we have to do better, be better, act better, learn better, study more, do the things that are required to make these things happen. So that's a really critical piece as we self-check. So obviously, this is my rapport building slide. This is my family. My son on the left is, on my left, I should say, eating the ice cream and busting out some Hamilton at school. Is my son Riley. He's turning 12 in about 7 days. My son Bodie's on the right, who learned how to ride off of a bike jump over the weekend. So he's very excited. Have tons of slow-mo videos if folks want to see it in another time. That's our dog Lola down in the bottom. And then my wife Kathy, who could not do any of this with ever. So big kudos to the family for supporting me as we get this stuff done. So this is a little bit of the brag book, but what's really important here isn't who I've worked with, it's about you. So everything I do is about making sure you understand how we can be better at sales, right? A lot of this stuff will actually come out into helpful life skills, is what a lot of people tell me. So I'm really excited about that. And by all means, yes, these are the customers I've taught it to. So you're going to learn the same thing these people have all learned along the way. Most important thing, aside from raising our success, is that we have to keep an open mind. I am by no means the end-all, be-all expert. I've certainly gathered enough knowledge that I want to share, but it doesn't mean that I know everything in every single moment. So I'm happy to share this knowledge with people. And I also want people to share themselves. So feel free, go into the chat, work through the chat, have a response. If you're different than me, Colin will pull this stuff out and we'll have some conversations. We'll also do some role playings. All I really want though is for people to just keep an open mind about everything we learned here today. So let's talk about N.E.A.T selling, right? So what is N.E.A.T? This is the principle for which I've created my sales training over the years. Came to me just sort of literally on the back of a cocktail napkin. And it really does talk about the essence of sales. I'm using it to replace BANT. I'm using it to replace Annum, MedPick, Medic. They're all good. And the most important thing here is that you don't have to follow N.E.A.T. I just want you to follow it. Oh, there goes my dog. Sorry about that. So by any means, if you're following Medic, don't change it just because you walked into Richard's training. Medic is very good. MedPick is very good. BANT, I would tell you not to follow so much, but I know a lot of people who do. So what are the elements of N.E.A.T? Need is the most important thing, right? So need is really understanding the who, the what, the when, the where, the how. That's how we determine what someone's true needs are, right? If you talk to anyone, whether it's in sales, business, life, understanding their frame of reference, trying to get into their mindset in their headspace is where you really do understand and can see what's happening. So the next piece of this is around economic impact, meaning what is the need? You have a need, but what's the economic impact of that need? And beyond that, specifically what I'm looking for is not just the ROI. I don't like talking about ROI as our friend Colin, I know, Rob Jepson says, you got to dollarize it. You have to make sure that you put a financial piece to this. So for example, in the simplest of places, if your product or service can save someone time, that's great, that's wonderful, but that's not enough. So if you can save them 2 hours a week, well, yeah, there's a hard cost to that. There's so many, there is a financial cost to what is their salary, what is their overhead cost, but there's a much bigger economic impact. What does someone do with that extra 2 hours? Every person I know in sales and business and life has a to-do list of at least 8 things, right? We all have one. So the question becomes, what else can you get to faster and more effectively on your to-do list? And what's the economic impact of getting that done? So sort of the real world example is that if you got a service that you're helping someone save time, and because you save them time, they can now take that extra time. Maybe they could go coach their sales team, 4 more times a week with those 2 hours. Or they've got a product that needs to get out the door and they now have an extra 2 hours to build the product or to talk to a customer. These are all the things that what really create economic impact. That's what I want people to understand. So it's not just like your time and your effectiveness and your efficiency. Those are all buzzwords that sound good, but everybody can save time. Everybody can do things, right? I'm teaching people how to be more effective and efficient in their sales conversations, which then means hopefully they go deeper. I don't necessarily want you to have more conversations. In some cases you do. That's okay. But in a lot of cases, I want you to have better conversations. So if you have fewer conversations, but you use my training and those conversations are better, then your conversion rate goes up. That's what I call real economic impact. So I'm going to pause for a second. I see some stuff sort of coming in on the chat. Colin, anything we want to address yet? Cool.
Oops, right. Sorry, I was on mute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Did you hear me before or no?
No, you were on mute.
Okay. No, sorry. No, just general questions right now about the recording. We're good.
Awesome. Cool. So understanding this economic impact is really important. The A in N.E.A.T selling, well, it's no longer about authority anymore. It's about access to authority. When are you going to talk to that person who truly can say yes or no? Often doesn't happen until much later in a sales cycle, right? Much later, way beyond your qualifying stage, even sometimes beyond discovery stages. It may not come in until you get to what I call it the selection stage, right? Where they're actually starting to think about you. You've been shortlisted. That's when you might get to the real authority. In the meantime, it's about, does the person I am talking with actually have access to that authority level that I need, right? That I want. And in some cases, you know it, in some cases you don't. So you have to maybe make the assumption that they have access. Now, we're going to walk through later today and tomorrow, we're going to walk through, well, what happens if someone says, give me everything, give me your pricing, give me your competitive analysis, give me your case studies. What do you do before you actually spoken to that level of authority? But right now, I just want you to understand that this is how it exists in the world. So, and then of course, the last thing that we do have to qualify is timeline, right? So we do have to know what is their timeline? What is their line in the sand? What are the ways that we know that they're being sincere about their offerings? So the last thing I want to do, and then what I want people to do is I'd love for people to go in and tell me, just go into the chat, what's your favorite way to ask about timeline? This is one of my favorite ones to get. So let's just sort of see what the crowd has to say. It's always fun to do that. And then what we really want to understand around timeline is what happens if you don't meet that deadline? This is a great question to ask, in my opinion. If someone says, hey, we want to get this started by July 1st, oftentimes we get happy years. Salespeople love to jump in and go, oh my God, they said July 1st. That's fantastic, which is great. But we never ask the follow-up question, which is, well, what happens if we don't launch by July 1st? What happens if that doesn't happen? Because if we don't know that, then it really is just a line in the sand. There's no real commitment there. So I really wanted to sort of pause here for a second, see if there's any questions or comments or in general around this, around these questions. So what's the compelling initiative? I love that question. It's really good. I have no issues with those kinds of questions. Can you share any deadlines attached to the initiative? Great question. Based on what you've seen, what's the next appropriate steps? I love that, Nick. That's an awesome question. I love anything that says based on what you've seen. Nick's doing two things, in my opinion. Nick can correct me. One, he's trying to figure out what the next steps are and if there's a timeline. But the other piece that he's also figuring out is who's the competitor? Have they started looking at anybody else, right? And he said it in a very subtle way that just says, what have you seen in the marketplace? So I love that, Nick. Really, really great. Christopher, I like that. You know, if you do nothing, what happens? Who feels the pain the most? These are all great questions. So by all means, everybody should take a minute and copy and paste this into a big Word document yourself somewhere. Any other questions around this just before we sort of move on to the next thing?
I had one come in privately.
Yep.
I think I understand the context to it. It's how do you dollarize someone's to-do list? And he says, I discover all the 8 things, his wage, the time it takes to do the 8 things on the to-do list. I imagine the context is that he's selling a to-do list product.
So
do you have an example of how you would do that, Richard?
Yeah, so how I would handle that, it's a really good question is, one, it's not just about the time to get the stuff done, but as he checks off the to-do list, what is that solving? What's getting done faster and what's the impact of that getting done faster, right? So the best way I can describe it in this scenario is, think of it as if you're talking about someone's roadmap, right, for their product. Well, if you can help them solve 2 or 3 things on their to-do list, whether they're related to the product roadmap or not, but that means they can go and make the product improvements 30 days faster, 2 weeks faster, and that product improvement is something new you're going to start to sell. Well, now you understand that there's a way to drive revenue towards that. That's where we're really looking for from that. So I don't know if he's responded to you separately, Colin, but is that to me is what I think he's asking, or she is asking.
He says, I tried using Richard's specific words, but it brought us into a weird context. Elliot, I would say you can almost zoom out, right? You're almost being too specific. You're thinking about a to-do list, but I would think about the value of just being highly organized and what that brings to your day.
Yep. What do you get done because you're more organized, right? How much more gets done? And you better prioritize. Right, I'm notorious for this, for writing a to-do list and then having to rewrite it 3 times.
Yeah.
To put the most important thing on top, right?
Yep.
So that's my El Guapo. That's my challenge. If you remember the 3 amigos.
And so Elliot, if you're selling to Richard, you say, Richard, could you imagine a scenario where you had a tool on your iPhone where you could drag that top priority straight to the top and you could reorganize them every day? Would that be better?
Right? Yes. That's a perfect example. Excellent. Thanks. So the last thing I want to say is that as you think about N.E.A.T selling and what I've created is that it doesn't follow this pattern. You don't have to start with need. Life doesn't always work that way. It's built like a compass because you can start anywhere. I have some people who sell security products and they know that if there's a big crisis in the security world, they're going to talk more about economic impact. Right? They're going to talk about timeline a little bit faster. It doesn't mean that their timeline doesn't drive need, right? But these are the things that I want you to understand is that it doesn't have to follow a specific order like other processes and methodologies. So it really, really depends. It's one of my favorite ways to ask what's driving this conversation will often let me know if it's a need, an economic impact, an access to authority, or a timeline. And it's a really, really critical and important piece to do that. So, all right. Doesn't factor in change management. AJ, that's a good question or a good comment. If you're asking me, does it factor in change management? I would say that it can. It's not meant to be that specific, right? If you have to manage through and coach someone through change management, well, that's a much deeper conversation than just sort of following this process. And that conversation, to your point, will probably bounce around to all 4 of those main things to help understand the change management. if I'm understanding your comments as well. So, all right, this is the psychology stuff. This is the stuff I love doing. This is my favorite stuff to teach, which is how buying decisions are made. And ultimately, this is how every decision is made, right? Whether I wore this shirt or another shirt was definitely went through this process today. Whether in a non-COVID world, if you're going to eat the donuts that someone brings into the office, this is how you make that decision. I know that the donut challenge was Colin's biggest challenge when he had to go into an office on a regular basis. Someone always brought the donuts for him. So there's a psychological approach to this, which is called transactional analysis, right? This goes along the lines of the id, the ego, superego of Freud, but it's a lot easier to understand. And as we go through this, I want people to think about deals they've got in their pipeline, times where they've had this occur to them. And then we're actually going to open it up. We're going to let people sort of say, hey, Richard, I got a deal and I'm trying to figure out which ego state I'm in or which ego state my client's in. So I want to make sure that after we go through this, that we can role play it and real play it a bit. So the first ego state we all have is the emotional you, right? That's who we are at the core. When we lose a deal and it hurts, that's our emotional, that's our child that's being wounded. It's the same emotion as when someone breaks your heart, breaks up with you. You lose at a sport because you're really competitive. This is your child ego state. It's the emotional you, and it's where your feelings are stored. This will also have a lot to do with dating. You'll probably recognize some dating stuff in here at some point too. And you can also recognize the child ego state because it has this phrase of I want it, right? We hear this a lot, particularly in sales. I want a better price. I want the product to do this, right? I want, a G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip. I want an Xbox. I want a brand new Tesla. That's all our child ego state. And that's driving our decisions. And this is where decisions really originate. It's a real decision when someone says, I want it. And so our goal in a lot of ways is to find that spot with our prospects and customers so that they say, I do want that. Sometimes they want your product or service. Sometimes they want the benefit of that service. Yes, I do want to be more organized. Yes, I do want to stop writing my to-do list 5 times a day. I'd like to write it 2 times a day, right? That is your child ego coming through. Okay. Someone brings in that donut and it's like, wow, I really want to eat that chocolate glazed donut that just came out of Krispy Kreme because the light was on, right? That's your child ego. Your next ego state, or a ego state, and there's no order to these in all honesty, is the rational you. Okay. This is where you go through pros and cons, pluses and minuses, and the upsides and downsides. This is how you sort of start to move forward, meaning that it's hard to move forward in an emotional way that's comfortable until you've gone through some level of rationalization, right? If I'm going to go out and buy a big screen TV, I'm going to go look at all of them. I'm going to look at the sizes. I'm going to think, wow, that's great. Oh my God, I might do some, but at some point I decide I emotionally want it. Or maybe I just want to go look at them. Maybe you're not sure you want it, but you want to go look, you want to explore. Well, then you go through some level of rationalization. What's the right size? What's the price? Do I need 4D, 4HD, right? Do I need 4D, whatever it is, HDK, I think is the new one, right? What is it that we really, really want? And what's the rationalization it takes to get to that decision? It's always normal in making these decisions. You then have a parent ego state, which is often critical, not always, but often. And so this is the part of you that goes through the good and the bad, right? The right versus the wrong, the appropriate versus the inappropriate. Now, the parent ego state gives approval or judgment, right? So if you've ever, had to explain something to your parents and you're getting that tone, as I like to call it, feels like there's a little bit of criticism there. That's the parent ego state. And we all do it. Nobody doesn't do this. Nobody ignores one ego state over the other, right? That's always there. So I'm going to walk through a little bit more on this, and they sort of show you what this can look like in a sales world, right? So it's very possible that you are in a parent-to-parent ego state, right? You're both trying to judge right or wrong. And to a certain extent, there's a little bit of that in qualifying, even as SDRs. Is this person meeting the criteria that's required by us in order to move this to a handoff or an opportunity, whatever your process is? You can have adult to adult conversations, right? Those are really fun, where you're just trying to figure out next steps, right? Remember, the adult ego state gives us permission to move forward. That's when we know we're engaging the adult. And then you can have child to child, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You know, it could be as simple as you've had a really cruddy week. You've talked to nobody. All of a sudden, Friday afternoon shows up. Someone finally wants to talk to you, and you are just excited that somebody wants to talk to you, and you want to talk to them. Right? Now, if that person happens to be someone with no juice, with no clout, with no ability to move forward, maybe they're the end user, but they don't have the budget. They don't get to make the decision. They could be super excited. You can be super excited. The challenge with that, though, is that sometimes when you have two kids together, they can't really make a decision. It's hard for them to be rational because they're both being emotional. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, this is just human nature, human psyche, and how it works. I really want folks today to be able to walk out of here and understand that this is what's happening. I don't expect anybody to master this. I don't expect you to become experts at it. I want you to be aware of it. And it's in that awareness, it's in that moment that hopefully makes it easier for you to move your deals forward, to become less hurt when things don't go your way, right? Just create some emotional space and distance between what's actually occurring and what needs to occur and your emotions around those things. That's why I teach this transactional analysis. There are times where the prospect can sound like a parent, and we end up sounding like a child. This happens a lot when the prospect is taking a very negative approach to us, right? It's not them asking for the discount, because we'll talk about that in a bit. It's maybe when they're trying to compare you to your competitor, right? Now, there's a couple of things that happen. So one, when we hear this parent tone, because we've been raised by some level of parent or authority figure, we will often end up in the child mindset where I want it. And the thing that you want the most is you don't want to screw it up. You don't want to miss this opportunity, right? And so this happens a lot. So just by human nature, you might hear that tone, and all of a sudden you're put into that child ego state. Okay? My goal here is that if you hear that, if you feel that inside of you, that hopefully you can get to an adult ego state. You can ask different questions around what's going to hopefully move them from a parent ego state into an adult ego state. Can you ask some rational questions for things? I see some stuff coming in on the chat, so I'm going to pause for a second.
We've got a couple here. First, Jared wants a clarification on what was the parent ego, or sorry, what was it that the parent ego gives?
Oh, sorry. The parent ego, it's a great question, gives approval or judgment. Pull out your cell phone, take a picture of this. This is one of those screens people like to take a picture of, but it's a great question. So your child ego is where your decisions originate. Your adult ego gives you permission to move forward. That's the one we're really trying to engage as much as we can. And then the parent ego state gives approval or judgment. And I want to make sure the parent ego state is not bad, right? Even though it says critical self, but someone does need to make a decision. Is this the right thing? Even us as SDRs and AEs, when we disqualify someone, that's us using a parent ego state. So I teach it in sort of this emotional way to make you go, oh my God, I hate that. But it is healthy to have that ego state. These are all very healthy things to have and to experience and to use in a way so that you can better equip yourself to handle the conversations that are happening.
We're good now, Richard. The rest are just comments.
Cool. There's a chant, by the way, this parent to child ego state, if you're in your first week of the job, first month of the job, sometimes we feel like we're in that child ego state. We don't want to mess up this call. We don't. So sometimes we actually project them to become the parent because of how we're feeling. Again, natural, normal, totally okay. My hope is that by explaining this to you, that maybe you don't let those emotions take you too far down a rabbit hole. That's my goal of this conversation, right? All these things are going to happen. I still have these challenges. So there's a chance where they're in an adult ego state and maybe we're in a parent ego state. Maybe they're trying to be rational about something and you're trying to ask them questions so that you can ascertain if they're really going to be worth your time. Not in a negative way, right? Maybe it's a budget question. Maybe you're asking them, so who does control the budget, right? That could be a little bit of a parent ego state if we're not careful, and depending on tone. Tonality happens a lot in these ones. There are times where they're the child and you're the parent or the adult. This happens in a couple of different places. Oftentimes, if you're not talking to, if you're talking maybe to the end user of your product, but not the person who can make the decision, right? Or oftentimes, you'll get sent, hey, my boss told me to go and research this, right? So they're a child ego, just based on their own role, based on what their supervisor has asked them to do. And so they're coming in excited and sounding excited because, as far as they know, it's meeting all the criteria, but they may not have enough information around it. So then this to me is what a sales conversation really looks like. These ego states will fly constantly all throughout the conversation. You'll start the sentence in one ego state and end it in another, right? It's bound to happen. And so my goal here isn't to make you figure out how to untangle all this. Right now, I just want you to recognize that there's some stuff going on. And hopefully by recognizing it, you can create some safe emotional distance so that you can start to realize that, hey, this is what it means when someone says they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting the process. Even though it still feels like they're rejecting the product. I hear that from sales leaders all the time. Right? Well, they're not rejecting you, they're just rejecting the product. Well, yeah, but it still hurts. This is meant to help you create some of that healthy emotional distance so that you can try to dig in. So that when you're in that child ego state, which often I see, we get that deer in headlights, oh my gosh, I should ask this, I shouldn't ask this, what should I do? And then oftentimes we don't. Therefore, we put someone in a parent ego state. We put them too high up on a pedestal. The piece I really want folks to understand is that be conscious of this. We see this a lot and hear this a lot. And we're going to talk in a minute about how oftentimes we think this is a parent or child ego state, when in fact, the other person really isn't in a parent ego state. They're actually acting like a big baby. They're acting like a child. So next piece I want to focus on, and then we're going to stop and pause and maybe do some role playing. So feel free to send Colin a chat to say, hey, I want to ask Richard a question, and we'll unmute you and we'll walk through it. Think about a deal you're working on, thinking about a deal that you've had a conversation on. This can come up in job interviews, by the way. It's the same emotional stuff that happens. So there are two parts to the parent ego state. There's the critical parent, which in my house, I'm very comfortable acknowledging that that's what I got a lot of as a kid. The parent ego, the critical parent will bring out the rebellious child. So if you've ever thought about the times you've gotten into a heated conversation with your parents, even as an adult, if we're interpreting their thoughts or their words as critical, we have a natural tendency to rebel. That's what happens when you hear the critical parent. On the flip side, the healthy side, there's the nurturing parent, right? The nurturing parent brings out the natural child. This is the one where, yeah, it's mom and dad sort of helping put a Band-Aid on it. But maybe it's, in sales, it's how do you define empathy, right? Being empathetic in sales, right? We've heard a lot about it, particularly in the last 90 days, 3 months, right? How to be empathetic, right? For me, it's a little bit more, how do I be authentic than empathetic, right? My authentic self is what I think people buy more than my empathetic self. So the nurture brings out the natural child. I want to explain what the natural child is. I was once in New York City. I was coming down an elevator. It was about 7 or 8 o'clock at night in the winter. And I got in the elevator, and there was a mom and dad and their daughter, who was probably about 5. And she was all dressed up in her fake fur coat and some cowboy boots and just super excited, had this big grin on her face. And I looked at her and I said, "Have you ever been to New York City before?" And she just shook her head no, but she had a big grin on her face. And I said, "Have you ever been outside at night in New York City?" And she said, "No." And I said, "So you're pretty excited?" And she goes, "Yes." And her parents thought it was very cute, obviously, because it was just a fun conversation. That girl was in her natural child ego. Right? When I decide to go buy a new car and I get excited and I get giddy, yeah, that's my child ego. If I go buy a flat screen TV, if I buy a new house, if I buy the new iPhone that's coming out, it's my child ego coming through. I'm excited like a kid, just like on my birthday. And that's really a good place to be. And it's helpful as a salesperson to be that nurturing parent to your prospect. How do I help Colin feel like a natural child? If I can say, "Colin, tell me about the team. You know, what are we trying to accomplish here? What is it that we're trying to get? What goals have people hit? What haven't they hit? What's going to signify, that this was a good decision for us, in terms of training, right?" And there I am, I'm nurturing Colin through a conversation, because sometimes even our own emotions get in our own way. And that happens all the time. So now that doesn't mean that you shouldn't use a critical parent ego state. It's very healthy to do that. When you ask a question of, "Hey, Colin, just out of curiosity, what else have you seen in the marketplace?" Right? You're not being critical of them as humans, but you're being critical of the process to make sure you understand what's happening. And so understanding that you're trying to follow through on a process, but then use the right tone and the right question is the healthy part. So you can still use a critical tone in a healthy way. And they may say, "Oh no, Richard, we've decided that you're the one," or, "Well, we're looking at you and we're looking at somebody else." Well, you can even hear that there's a little bit of rebellion in there, but that's healthy rebellion. There's nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has sort of a scenario they'd like to share, and let's walk through it and talk about it.
Who we got, folks? Who wants to step up and do a role play? A room full of salespeople.
Exactly.
Timid salespeople.
Well,
Folks, don't worry. This is Richard. Richard is very calm. He doesn't bite. I was on this last month. I think you walk away learning more if you step up to the plate.
Hey, this is Ajay
Sonia?
from India.
Hi, Ajay.
What do we have here?
Hey, Richard.
Hey.
Hey. So a quick background about me. I work in the IT software services industry, and so this parent-child relationship or the transaction analysis is something that I face on a day-to-day basis. So one recent event that happened is when we try to sell more of a commoditized software services, which is very common, and
Yep.
and we can differentiate a lot amongst other vendors. And when we are trying to pitch that to one of our customers who has like 20 to 25 vendors who can provide the same level of services, so that is when I've seen a similar transaction, where they act like a critic and they come up with thoughts on how best they can negotiate the pricing, and
Right.
whoever brings the lowest the rates wins the deal. So how do we tackle that?
So um, I'm really glad you brought this up on pricing. It's a great question. First of all, everybody will commoditize you as best they can, no matter what. Like you and I, it sounds like you truly are in a commoditized world. So I want to say this to everybody. Look, I get commoditized too. right? It happens to me. Oh, you're just like this other sales trainer. So there are two ways to handle that. The first thing is at the ego level, whenever you're starting to negotiate pricing, your prospect is not in a parent ego state at all. And I'll let someone chat in. What ego state do we think they're in when they're negotiating pricing?
We got Mark saying child, Jared saying adult, bunch of people saying adult.
No, they're in the child ego state. They're when I want a better price. When if you don't give me your price, I'm going to go to mom. If you don't give me what I want, I'm going to go to daddy. This is the biggest mistake I see, and it's for me, it's one of the most fun parts to negotiate because now I know exactly where they are, right? And if you haven't read Walter Goggins' story, this is the part where I go, oh, you're in a child ego state. I'm going to take a piece of your soul right now. So that's his line, but I love it. So a couple of things to think about. So one, you then have to, if they're in a child ego state, whoops, trying to close this, go back. We've got to find a way to get them to a rational point of view and to get them to justify the price. Now, if it's straight up, hey, here's 10 vendors, yours is $2 higher than these other 6 vendors, that's tough. But there's a couple of ways to go through it. Right? One is to say, yes, I'm just like Colin, and here's what else I do. So now I've acknowledged the commoditization, but now I'm plus oneing me, meaning now I'm above them. If I say, yes, I'm just like Colin, but here's what else I do, but has a negative connotation to it. And oftentimes, whenever you say the word but, everything else you said before that gets negated and lost. So in a competitive world, I'll be like, yeah, that's exactly what we do, and we do this. So I'm hoping there's something different about everybody that you can plus one yourself. Because now what ends up happening is they now have to decide, is that better for them? Is what you're plus one better? And hopefully it is. And secondly, they now have to go and get the other people to defend themselves. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to win every time. I get it. Competitive world, you're not always going to win. What I want people to do, particularly when I come out of my training, I want people to have an improved courage and confidence so that you can say, I left it all out there. I left it all on the field. I gave it everything I got. I asked all the right questions. And if they didn't choose it, then, yeah, I can go back and do some self-analysis and see if there's something else I can tweak. But I want to make sure that I know what to do, that I've done everything I can and go to bed at night saying, I did it. I did all I could do. So I'm going to pause there. So just keep that in mind. They're in the child ego state. So the first thing is to say, yes, we do that and we do this. The other thing that I say this a lot, I get into this a lot, which is, well, Richard, your price seems high. And of course, the natural response is compared to what? Well, now I'm getting into a little bit of a critical tone with everybody, right? I'm being a rebellious child because I heard a critical tone, when in fact they were in a child tone. So I turn around and this is my best answer for competitive pricing, or when people ask for a deal, is to quite simply say, totally understand what you're saying there, Scott, but you know what? The market dictates my price. There's no answer anybody can give me that's rational to defeat that. Well, Richard, that's not what we budgeted for. Totally understand that, Scott. I understand, but the market dictates my price, not a spreadsheet. There's no rebuttal to that. Now, do I win? I do win more when I use that line. Have I still lost things? Sure. People can be like, well, Richard, we just can't do it. Like, that's just not what we budgeted. And then I have to make a decision. I have to make an emotional decision as a child. How bad do I want that business, right? If it's a good logo, yeah, I probably might lower the price, right? Like I'll figure something out. I might trade off. Okay, I'll lower that price, but I need a CEO quote. I need a quote from your CEO. I need a case study. I need all those things so that I can go make up that price difference I'm giving to you. I'm going to pause there again and see, Colin, is there anybody else who wants to sort of chime in with a real world example?
Anyone want to step up? Come on, come on. Here we go. We got Vlad. I'm trying to remember, Richard, how to activate the
Can you hear me?
video. Oh, you got it, Richard?
No?
No, I think you didn't lock it, Colin.
Oh.
I think it just.
Well, everyone's been on good behavior then.
Exactly.
Great.
Exactly. How are you doing, guys?
Good.
Hey, Richard. Long time haven't seen you. Quick question.
Yeah.
I'm actually negotiating a comp plan with a couple of companies, right? So that's where the states are applicable. So I'm coming from the state of kind of, I'm trying to show them the way so where they're going to make a lot more money. And then they're being sort of like, oh, I don't want to pay that much. I want to pay less, right? So, and kind of we're in this situation where it's back and forth. And I've showed them the way, okay, so this is how much revenue is going to grow when I join and when I execute on the plan. And this is how much I want to make. So, and kind of we have a little bit of a disconnect here where like there's still a gap. And I think I'm worth that. And they think that they should be paying a little bit less.
So so just so I understand, you're negotiating in an interview stage.
Well, it's kind of the final post-interview, post-everything, right? So we kind of
That's
just
fine.
just
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure I understood.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I haven't accepted the offer yet.
Okay.
I'm kind of like counter offering what the offer that they made.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, do you have any other offers on the table? Do you?
Yes,
have
I
any
do.
other...
Yes, I do. Indeed, I have actually 3 offers right now that's sitting on my table, and I'm
awesome
negotiating. Yeah.
So again, and based on, and of course, this makes it a lot easier emotionally, right?
Of course, yeah.
Awesome, right? So how's their comp plan compared to the other comp plans? Is it better, worse, same, about the same, negligible?
Well, the company I like, it's a little bit worse than the other company, but I'm okay with that because I like the company, I like the product, and I actually think that I can make it much better long term.
Okay. So I think so. This is a great question, right? And you're probably experiencing all these ego states at once, right? Like this is happening constantly. So I think you have to make some decisions, right? You're going to have to get into your adult brain, right? Well, the compensation's not quite where I want, but I really love this company.
Yep.
Right. And I like the fact that you're trying to negotiate. I think that if theirs is less, how do we find the polite and professional way to say, hey, look, the market's dictating this. You're coming in here. Can you help me understand that difference? Make them defend that price rather than negotiating, right? Say, I'm confused. Like, I get it. I love it. But from what I see in the marketplace, this is 10% lower. Where is the rationale in that so that I can make so that I can get on your page, right? So you can say, look, I want to be on your page. So there's clearly something that just hasn't been communicated yet. So can you help me understand that? That way you're not pointing fingers and laying blame and hopefully not coming off like a critical parent. You're trying to nurture them through, right? Remember, they're in a child ego state. They want Vlad. And Vlad wants them, right? Now, the other piece, this is more of a career advice. My next question is, as you look at these potential offers, which one shows you the best for career advancement?
Yeah, and then I think this aligns perfectly with that company that I'm talking about, right? So like everything aligns except that this compensation is still a little bit of mismatch.
I think you've got to make, that's part of your rational decision, and it still feels emotional, right? As to, well, which one are you going to go through? And then it's always going to come back to your child ego state. What do I want to do? Right? And so I think it's a really great question. How I would go back and negotiate it is to say, hey, I'm noticing this in the marketplace and you're offering this, I'm trying to figure out, how do you define that as fair? Can you help me understand what I'm not understanding, because clearly I don't understand if the market's telling me this and you're telling me that, right? Now, the other question, and this is the other piece, is if they're going to start to nickel and dime you at this stage of the game, I can
Probably
assure
not worth
you,
it.
yeah, the decisions, you know, it sounds like a CFO decision. This is the number and this is what we're paying and that's it. Well, then you have to decide what's that worth to you, right?
Yeah.
You have to decide, is that logo on your resume worth that percentage, right? How far of a percentage off are they based on the market?
Well, again, the market is quite like the gap in just the range in the market is quite large. So it could be like 30 to 40 grand difference in the total comp plan, right? So it's all how you look at it from the experience, from the have you done it before, and so forth, right? They
But
could
I also, but I
probably
think that's
find.
a great, you know, again, I would be like, hey, when I see the marketplace, you know, we're not talking about $5,000, right? We're talking $30,000. Like, how can you help me, Justin? How can you help me get to your page at that when I see this in the marketplace?
Yeah.
Like, it's easy to say here, right, amongst 120 or 130 of our closest friends. Hopefully they're not listening. Hopefully they're not dialed in. Maybe they are.
Oh, it's okay. I mean,
Right.
it's negotiation should be open. I
Right.
think if
So,
if everybody wants to achieve the best outcome, then everybody should
right.
have their cards on the table.
Absolutely. They owe me 5%. You owe me 10% of the deal. So,
Yeah.
so I hope does that answer the question, or does it at least give you some direction?
Oh, it gives me, yeah, like it confirms what I was thinking, how to approach it. But totally, yeah. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Sure. Sure. Let's do one more if anybody's got something.
Anyone else want to come on? Who do we have here? Sonia? Sonia, you should be able to unmute yourself. Let me know if that works.
Did it work?
You're good.
Yep.
Awesome. Hi, Richard. Nice to
Hi.
see you after such a long time. Hey.
know.
All right. We are on the topic of, negotiations and things like that. And this is where I think I struggle, just because the way my market is structured.
Okay.
So I'm in food industry right now, and the decision-making unit is not a very straightforward unit. So I present my product or my offering to my customer, and then they take it to their customers. And sometimes there is another customer involved. So the chain is too long, and I don't have a transparency of what's happening beyond my customer.
Mhm.
And that's why sometimes it's very difficult to negotiate, because I really don't know who I'm talking to
Right.
and what kind of feedback or communication they have down the lane. This just makes it very, very difficult to find the right answers, even if I'm asking the right questions and I'm trying to be the adult in the conversation. I don't know how to navigate that sometimes, to bring the transparency
Yeah.
to the conversation.
So I'll throw out some suggestions, and it's very possible
Great,
that
thanks.
you're trying this. So, you know, say, well, Richard, I've tried that and that didn't work. So
Mm-hmm.
one is understanding your customer's world, right? Hey, if you're helping them support their customer, what do they need from you to make that work?
Okay.
You know, so being able to say to your customer, hey, you know, because we're playing this game of telephone, how do I help you do this to best position yourself as the right choice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Assuming they have a competitor too,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so to a certain extent, what will often happen is just the inherent, your ability to say, hey, you know, other than to say, hey, I'm here to help you, say, how can I help position you as the leader, sends them a message of how you do business. And that's going to make them trust you. Right. So it's less about what do I need to do to support you? Because most people don't know how to answer that.
Okay.
It's not about what information can I give you, not about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about, in this opportunity, how can I help make you look like the thought leader to your own
Understood.
customer? And it's an effort there that matters, in my
Oh
opinion.
yeah. And a lot of it, I think.
Yeah. And so for me, a lot of what happens in sales is that people don't necessarily buy what you do. They buy how you do it, right? So trying to understand these ego states and some of the other stuff we're going to learn today, all of that helps them feel more, helps them to fall in trust with you. That's what we want, right? We don't want them to fall in love with us. I
Right.
want them to fall in trust with me,
Mm-hmm.
because that trust comes before the love. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, definitely. Most definitely. Thank you.
Sure, sure. All right, I'm going to go through one more little section, and then we're going to take a break for about 10 minutes. So in sales, there's a well, in life, there is this rule of reciprocity, right? And this rule of reciprocity is quite simply, the easiest way to describe it is that humans return good deeds. If someone does a favor for me, I feel obligated to do a favor for them. So in sales, and particularly in the ego states, recognizing where someone is in their space makes them feel more endeared towards you. And it's a really important piece. So this is how people are going to do business with you based on how you do business versus what you actually do. The best way I can describe it, I know that I'm in a reciprocity game whenever I ask someone a question, whenever I say something and someone says, hey, Richard, that's a really good question. Right? So in my world, and I would love everybody should take this and try to spin it into yours. I will say to someone like Colin, I'll be like, hey, Colin, excited to talk to you about training. Hey, at the end of training, you want your team to be better at blank, blank, and blank. What are the 3 things that fill in those blanks for you? And Colin will give me some answer, and they're almost always going to be buzzwords. And you're going to see and hear the wheels start going off in Colin's brain. And you will hear phrases like, wow, that's a really good question. Or they're going to go, oh, yeah, I want it to be, prospecting, negotiation, and closing. And then I'm going to turn around to Colin and I'm going to go, hey, Colin, those are great. I hear it all the time, but they're buzzwords. What do you mean by closing? And now he's really going to have to think, because now I'm trying to drive him to a use case or his own internal case study to answer my question. And if I can drive someone to that internal case study, then I know that I'm pushing them in the right direction, and they're grateful for that. Sometimes they'll say, wow, that's really good, Richard. I never thought about it quite that deeply, right? But I know that internally they're going to feel it, because no matter what everybody ever says to me when I ask that question, it's always a surface pain. Oh, Richard, we want our SDRs to be better at setting more appointments. Okay, well, what do you mean by set more appointments? Because 6 things have to happen before that. So what do they need to be better at before they try to set the appointment? Then you start making them think. And in that moment where they're going through this deeper thought of like thinking harder, thinking in a way they've never thought before, they appreciate you asking a better question than the other person. So pause there for a second, see if there's any other questions or comments, and then we'll take a break.
Nothing has come in yet.
All right.
Anyone have a question you want to drop before we take a break?
But Richard, hi, quick question. It's Rhythm this side. Sorry, I didn't kind of put it in the chat. I thought it'll be kind of easier and quicker to just ask. Firstly, thank you for holding this event. Quick question on the rule of reciprocity. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more as to, what should be going on in our heads to trigger that kind of a mindset within the customer? I know you gave an example earlier, but could you kind of maybe kind of just give us a little in a more simpler terms, like how we're supposed to structure our conversation kind of to help?
Yep, it's a great question. And the rest of what we do coming back from this break will help drive to that. How do I actually earn the right to ask that question, right? How do I get to the point where I can say, hey, what's driving this conversation? Sure. So I promise you I'll answer it, but I want to get it when we go into more context. And if I don't, come back and say, hey, Richard, you missed my point. You missed my question. All right.
Will do.
You can call me out on it.
Will do. Thanks, Richard. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Let's take a 10-minute break. Everybody stretch their legs, grab something to eat or drink, bio break, all that kind of stuff. Be back in 10. All right, and we're back. So thank you, everybody. Always good to take a little break, but I'm glad to be back as well. Let's go ahead and move. Well, before we move forward, any other questions that have come up just in general, right? Rule of reciprocity, neat selling, the ego states, anything anybody's got a question or something they want to share or ask, feel free. All right. Well, let's go forward then. Oh, spam risk coming in on the cell phone. Buyer and seller's journey, right? Greatest sales book ever written. Anybody know it? There's a huge hint in front of you. Feel free to chat it away. Anyone? Greatest sales book. Colin, you know this one.
Green Eggs and Ham.
It is. Green Eggs and Ham is the greatest sales book. So thank you, Hadi, for not attending or for attending and not cheating. So in this book, Sam, our little main character here, all over it, asks for the sale about 40 times. He is the persistent of sales, in a box with a fox, in a boat with a goat, and a train in the rain, right? Because he's on this journey and he's got certain behaviors, desires, and needs. In fact, he's not even trying to qualify. He's just trying to sell. On the other hand, you have this other character who does not have a name, and he's saying, nope, just looking. Don't like it, not gonna eat it, don't like green eggs and ham. What ends up happening later in this book, in the end, for those who don't know it, is that eventually Sam stops talking and asks a very simple question. Oh, you don't like them. He finally acknowledges his customer in his customer's own mind, in his own headspace. And that's a really important place. That's the part we need to be. And then he even said, hey, you know what? You don't actually have to try to like them. You don't have to eat them, but just try them. You don't have to eat the whole thing. Just try it and see if you like it. So a conversation occurred. And through that conversation, someone tried, which I credit Dr. Seuss with creating the SaaS 14-day free trial. That is where the free trial in my mind came from. It all came from Dr. Seuss. So that's what we want to understand. That there's this buyer mindset and the buyer journey, and then the customer and the seller and the seller's journey. And here's the challenge that I see in most places is that this is how we're taught to sell, right? One is we got to find somebody. Then I have to generate some interest. And I need to learn about them, right? Whoops. Then I go into some level of a needs analysis. Then I go into my demo and proposal mode. And then I go into a trial, close, and a close, right? That's how we're taught to sell. First sales process I ever learned was at a company called The Gap, selling clothes. And it was called Gap Act: greet, approach, product knowledge, add on, close, and thank you. And the interesting thing about retail is 100% inbound, right? Not a lot of outbound selling in that. So always a fan of bringing people from retail into the world, but that's going to be the biggest hump they have to get over, in my opinion. And hopefully if they're hungry enough, they'll do it. So that's how traditionally we're taught to sell. I still see it to this day. So for me, it's job security. The challenge is that's not how people buy. If you walk into the Gap and I'm standing up there folding clothes and I say, hey, how are you today? Very first thing out of someone's mouth is often something like, no, thanks, just looking. I didn't even ask them what they were doing. I didn't ask them if they were looking at anything. I didn't ask them if they needed help. I just said, how are you? So if you've ever heard the phrase buyers are liars, this is how people buy. And I do it. I can walk into the store and I'll do the same thing. It's just habitual, right? It's been taught. I might fake some level of interest, right? which now, as the seller might start to get a little excited. I might start asking more questions as the buyer. Now the seller even gets bigger happy years, right? Happy years. That's hearing what you want to hear and not hearing what's really being said. Then I might move into some level of pro bono consulting. I'm just giving away free advice constantly. And then people will promise, here's where we are. And then here's what we all know, they hide. Everybody I know has got a pipeline full of these people, right? We didn't qualify enough and now they're hiding. By the way, this is my standard. Granted, in a COVID world, I would extend this a little bit, but traditionally, any deal that's in your pipeline more than double the standard sales cycle should be killed. If your sales cycle is 30 days and it's in there more than 60, kill it. There was no deal. You didn't do a good enough job. You can try and go back one more time, but it's not gonna happen. I might give you an extra 30%, extension due to COVID. But even at this point, if people are pausing, then we ought to know that they're not real deals, or we ought to qualify. We ought to be saying questions like this. I know we're going on a little bit of a tangent. Hey, if this weren't COVID, would you have bought this by now? It's a great question to determine with the stuff that's in your pipeline. Now, granted, you have to have earned the right to ask that question, and I'm going to work through that in a minute. But so what I want people to understand is that these journeys do not align. First, I got to find someone, then they're going to lie to me. I got to generate some interest, and then they're going to have to fake any interest if they have any. Then I'm going to learn about them, and they're going to gather information for free. This was very similar to my early stage college dating life. Find someone, can I buy you a drink? Sure. Okay, great. So what's your major? Poli-sci. Where'd you come from? I have a boyfriend back home, right? Like that was my dating life. So the journeys were not aligned. So gonna pause, see some comments coming in. I didn't know if there are comments, questions, or people just agree.
We had a question. I think I gave your answer to it. Maddie asked, what if your sales cycle can be 6 to 24 months? I said, that's okay. Just keep it in your pipeline, generally no more than 2x your average cycle.
Yeah. And by the way, there's no science behind Richard's philosophy there, Maddie. It's a great question. That's just sort of what I've seen, right? It's very sort of Richard's gut feeling, which is not how we're supposed to do sales. It's supposed to be more of a science. 18 to 24 month sales cycle is very different. I think it would be interesting, probably, how long have I not heard back from them? On average, how often do I hear back from somebody in that long of a sales cycle? Have I mapped out month 1, this is what's supposed to happen, month 2, month 3, month 4? If I've got an 18-month sales cycle, I should know each month what should be happening. And I should be able to run that across 10 or 15 or 20 deals and get an average. And then when I start to see delays, it makes me want to at least ask more questions, Maddie. Like, hey, totally fine if we're, pressing pause. We're slowing down compared to what we normally do. I just want to make sure that I'm not being too aggressive with you, but I don't want to let it slip through the cracks, that kind of a thing. So that's how I would handle that, Maddie. So this is the outline that I teach people to focus on, right? Is I want to build a foundation of trust. This goes back to my shirt, earning the right to ask questions. And this goes a lot back to the ego states, back to the question, right? And rule of reciprocity, right? How do I do things in a way that someone feels obligated to answer my questions, and not obligated in a manipulative way? I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm trying to teach. I never want anybody to be manipulative with your prospects or customers. Always be honest. So we can do things like introductions, time. We can build on that trust. We can talk about, before I start going into qualification, well, why are we talking in the first place? What's driving the conversation is more important than the actual conversation when you're first getting started, right? Have an agenda. Make sure they understand that there's an agenda. There's nothing worse than going into a meeting having no agenda. It can feel terrible. It can feel like the worst movie ever, right? It feels, well, most of you might be too young, but the movie Waterworld with Kevin Costner was a perfect example. So, understanding what those results can be yes or no, and then running through neat selling, how we're going to qualify these people. Talk about qualifying, pre-qualifying the demo. So I'm going to pause here. Here's how I teach people to pre-qualify the demo. I need to know stuff before I give you my demo about what's going to happen next. There's nothing worse than going into a demo conversation and all of a sudden you get to the end and you're rushed and you've left no time for Q&A. You've left no time to talk about next steps. So I will always preface a demo along the lines of, hey, Colin, we're about to walk in this demo. I know I'm going to show you these 2 or 3 things. I don't want to click around on 60 different things. Colin, what is it you really, really want to see today? Right? Colin, what pain am I trying to show you we solve in today's demo? Because there's 100 things we can do, but I can't show you 100. Right? I can show you the best ones. Where's your biggest pain? So first I'm pre-qualifying. The next part of pre-qualification is saying, great, Colin, I'm going to show you those things and they're going to go fabulously. Because if they don't, I won't hear from you, Colin. After I show this to you, what happens next on your side? What happens next at air call? And I'm already going to know the answers he's going to give me. He's going to give me the answer of, well, I need to go see somebody else's. I need to take it back to my team. I've got to take it to my boss, right? I don't know, there might be one other one. I don't know what it is, but those are the 3 we hear. So if I already know that those are going to be the answers, then I should have my next question available. Hey, Colin, if you're going to take it back to your team, what do you think they're going to say? Who's going to be the negative Nancy or the grumpy Gus on the team that's going to say no? What can I give you, Colin, to help you look good as you go share this with the team? Because I don't want to make you look bad. Right? I already know those things. Like I should have these scripts, and yes, I mean scripts, prepared 100%. If it's, well, we're going to go look at the competitor, great. Who else are you looking at? As soon as someone says they're looking at the competitor, you've earned the right to ask, who are they looking at? How you do it, the tone of voice, can you do it in a more nurturing way than maybe what I just said sounded like a critical parent, right? You know, I'm passing judgment, right? Find a natural, nurturing way to do that. And then basically at the end is like, what happens next? What do we do? How do we move forward? And the last thing I want to make sure people understand around this pre-qualifying the demo and the mindset. Demos are demos. They're not product training. When you test drive a car, you're not learning how to preset the radio stations. You're test driving the car. That's the same thing for a product demo if you're in a demo world. Make sure you distinguish training from demo. And then also make sure you understand what that demo needs to look like from your customer's point of view, right? There's nothing wrong with picking up your customer and saying, hey, you're our customer. You know what? Can I walk you through our demo and have you tell me what's wrong? Tell me what sucks about our demo. And if you've got a good customer and a good relationship with them, they'll tell you. They'll tell you they don't like this. This took too long. Have 2 or 3 of those conversations, and I promise your demo will get way better. So pre-qualifying the demo, understanding contracting, approval process, next steps, commercial terms. These are the things we want to understand post the demo, so we should ask before the demo. Then you go into closing, and then you go into customer success. So this is how I think people should be selling these days. We're going to do a lot of listening, right? More so than talking. And we're going to talk about how to do that in a moment, and then even tomorrow as we go into some other stuff. So I'm going to pause here for a second, see if there's any questions around this. These are usually not, but I always like to take a break so I stop talking.
Got one coming in here from Scott. If the person you're qualifying for the demo doesn't have these answers to the questions, do you move on?
It's a great question. It's a good question, Scott. The answer is I don't know. The most important, but here's the most important thing, Scott. You asked. That's what's important. Remember earlier today, I said, I want you to walk out of here with courage and confidence so that you can know that you've done the right thing, right? That you know you've done everything you can. Now, there will be other questions you probably could ask, right? You're right. Maybe it's the end user, Scott, and you're right. They're not going to know what the approval process is. They're not going to know what the contracting process is. here's the one thing I do know. Anybody you're giving the demo, that you're giving the demo to, is going to go have to report that back to somebody. So I'll say something like this. I will say, hey, Scott, appreciate you taking the time for the demo. What do you think happens next after you see it, if you like it? And if they don't know, like, I don't know, I got to go talk to my boss. That's probably what that person's going to have to say. If they're like, I don't know what's going to happen, then you kind of have to say, well, are you going to go talk to your boss? Or are you going to go talk to your team? Like, you may have to nurture them through this process in a nurturing parent way. But I would say, hey, Scott, look, sounds like you're taking some information back to the team. I just want to make sure you understand something, that whatever you take back to the team, I want to make sure you present it well, not because of me, but because of you. You're the one who's taking someone's time in your organization. They're watching you. They're looking at you. I want to make sure that I don't make you look bad and do everything I can to make you look good. So Scott, that's how I would try to handle that person. So
Richard,
yeah.
Damon's asking, what if the person won't give you the answers that you're seeking prior to the demo being completed?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Then I think it's worthy of asking, why are we doing the demo? And you're going to have to be mindful about your tone, right? Because your critical parent tone and your rebellious child will stick out, right? So you have to find a way to say, hey, Damon, I'm a bit confused, because in order for me to do this and make sure that you present this the right way, I kind of want to understand what happens next. And if they're just being that closed-minded to it, you have to make a decision, Damon. You have to make a decision to say, yeah, respectfully, Damon, it's a give-get. Like, in order for us to do this and for me to feel confident about this business, then, I expect to get something back in return for my time. And if you're not comfortable doing that, Damon, that's okay. No worries. I get it. No problem. So be it. Or, that's okay. Then we'll move on. Right. Now, you also have to take into account, do you have a competitor in the space? Is it a commoditized space? Like, there's a lot of things you got to be willing to do. But I can assure you that, one, if you give in on this, you will give in on pricing later. They have just set you up hardcore for negotiation, because they've shown that you're not getting anything. You've got about 5 things in your bucket. You've got a demo, you've got a trial, you've got a proposal, you got customer references, maybe 1 or 2 others that I can't think of. And if you're willing to give those away for free, then there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Right? There's not a lot. So I saw some other questions come in, but
Yep.
Colin, what else?
Yeah, we've got a good one from Lee. When you're selling to the C-level, but at the end user level, lower down the food chain is really the one who will understand the benefits. How do you go about convincing the C-suite to bring in these users?
Well, I think you have to understand. I think you have to sort of say, hey, look, I know you're the C-level, but how does this get translated down in your organization? I think you have to be able to say, hey, Colin, love that you're here. Always love talking to the final decision maker, but ultimately it's going to come down to whether or not your end user likes what we do. How do we engage them? Because if they aren't going to use it, I don't want to sell it to you, Colin. And there's not a C-level executive who's not going to agree with that.
Yeah.
Right? And I love this question. I can't remember the last time I ever had that lucky of a situation. Like, the C-level was there.
I know.
They didn't let me talk to the person who's actually going to use it.
Yeah, I'd say if you're having that problem continuously, you can also you should try a bottom-up selling approach where you're getting that buy-in from the lower level before you even get to the C-level.
So I would disagree with Colin on that. I would say, no, you stick to the C-level, but you get them to engage. You get them to say, hey, this is a really important, I get it, you're paying attention to this. But if your end user doesn't like it, then it doesn't make sense for me to sell this to you. So, because in that moment, when I say that to a C-level, I just took their soul. They're not used to having me say, I'm not going to sell this to you. So now they've got trust, and now they're going to be like, you're right. And so I would be able to say, hey, Colin, so when should we get them involved? because I don't want to waste your time or there. Anything else?
Yeah, Damon's asking, I work in higher education and a lot of my customers simply won't give me these answers due to heavy budget restrictions. Any advice on that?
Yeah, so I've sold into higher education in K-12, and that is a false belief system they've created. Now, again, you have to be willing to understand, look, there are about 2,300 higher ed institutions in the United States. I have maybe 3,000. I've got a couple of clients in that space. So your total addressable market's a little bit tougher because you don't have everywhere else to go, and it could be commoditized. So I don't want you to walk away with this, I'll just go find another customer thing. That I agree with you in that part. But I think you can press them. I think it's okay to say, hey, look, totally understand you don't like sharing that, but in order for me to do this, I think it's fair for me to ask for it, right? And if they push back, well, yeah, you can ask, but we're not willing to share it, then it's kind of like, okay, well, how would you like to proceed? How do I make sure I give you the best? And again, you're starting to get into a little bit of a parent ego contest, right? You're trying to be nurturing through the process, but they're going to hear it critically, and they're going to become a rebellious child. So I think you have to really walk through those scenarios and role play them. And to some point, you have to decide if you're going to have that conversation with them or not. Right? The challenge, and I know this about higher ed and education in general, is people stay there forever, way more than they do every other place I've ever been. Right? Like people just stay there forever. And by forever, I mean 10, 15, 20 years. So, they're hanging on to their pension. The other problem that I think they're having too is that they don't want to wreck the status quo because they don't want to have to work any harder. Right? So, the question might be, well, how do we find a way to move forward in a fair manner so that I can give you what you're looking for, but in fairness to me, I know that it's worth my time. Right? And that it's fair for both parties. And when you use that word fair, it helps because now they understand that it's not even and they know what they're doing. So there's more we could go into that on that sort of offline or later, but that's my initial response.
You want to take one more?
Yeah.
If a prospect directly wants to see a demo without getting on a call first, is it correct to assume that they are already ahead of the sales cycle with competitor vendor or with a competing vendor in the first place?
I think it's a natural assumption. I don't know if it's accurate all the time.
Yeah.
I had who was I talking? I was talking to a guy down in Athens, Georgia, and he told me that his favorite response to something like that is like, wow, I didn't know we were at that stage of our relationship.
Let's date before we get married, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was a really creative way to say that. Now, could you say that in an email versus phone call? I don't know. You got to play that out a little bit, but
Yeah.
I think
it's also
it's fair to say, hey, totally appreciate you wanting the demo, but if you've ever sat through really bad demos, it's because I don't have 3 minutes to ask you what you want to see, and I end up giving you mouse click, death by mouse click. Can you help me understand what you want to see so I don't give you death by mouse click? And everybody who's that way knows what you're talking about. So.
Yeah, and Sunil, if your gut is telling you they're far through with a competitor, it's okay to ask them where they're at in the buying process to get a sense. If you're concerned that they might be making a decision, tomorrow or this week, and you need to move fast. I don't know if you disagree with that, Richard, but I think it's always fine to just ask.
Everything's fair game. You just need to think about doing it, and I don't want you to overthink it so that you don't ask.
Yeah.
Right. But the other thing, there's a really important piece. When you lose a deal, but it's because you asked one of these tough questions, you will feel hurt for a little bit that you lost, but you're going to feel so much better because you asked the question. You didn't give in to your fear, and you didn't walk away being worried for 2 days. Oh, I should have asked that. I know I should have asked that. Oh, I should have asked that. So I'd rather ask the question and lose and walk away with my head held high that, hey, I exercise this tougher muscle that's hard to use, And at least I know. Because when my boss comes to me and says, well, what happened when you said, it's like, look, I asked him and here's what he said. Well, I asked the question, Mr. or Mrs. Supervisor. So what do you want me to do? Right? Like that's part of it.
We
Anything
just had
else,
one
Tom?
more. Yeah, we
Yeah.
got one more dropped in. I haven't read it yet, but I'll just go here. How would you apply this process to large enterprise deals? Typically, they involve multiple meetings with multiple stakeholders that all have different agendas, different titles, egos, etc.
Yeah. You ask the question. Hey, so just so I understand and typically in a deal that large, in a larger enterprise deal, you do have a champion, right? And so it's always good to say, hey, as we move forward, I may come to you and ask, who are the people I need to navigate, right? What is their decision making and how can I navigate that in a way that makes the champion look like a good person, not in a way to manipulate anybody. So I'm a big fan of saying, hey, what should I know about this group? What should I know about this person? How does this person like to be presented to, right? How can I help you? Because oftentimes you get into that, Vlad, you get into that larger deal. This is the best part is that, let's say, Vlad, you're that guy that's bringing me into these 6 other people. Hey, Vlad, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on you in this process. And Vlad's going to go, yeah, there are. Okay. Well, Vlad, here's the deal. I promise I'm not going to do anything to make you look bad, Vlad, because you're taking me to like 7 other people. And I don't want you to make it look like you brought the wrong person in or that you're wasting their time. Because internally, this is important for you, Vlad, as much as it is, more so than it is for me. So now all of a sudden, Vlad's gonna be like, okay, great, thank you. So now, through the rule of reciprocity that I've said, Vlad, I'm giving you this. The gift I want to give you is to make you look good and not make you look bad. When I then turn around and say, hey, how do I need to navigate that conversation? Who should I be aware of? Who's going to be the quiet and thoughtful person in the room? Who's going to be the one who sort of tries to command everything? Vlad's going to feel comfortable sharing that with me because he knows I'm doing it for lack of a better phrase, to help him and protect him. So.
We got one more, Richard, a little bit different. If your product involves customizations, which are definitely possible, but of course you're trying to value your engineers' time and efforts, how would you get commitment from your client beforehand so that they can go ahead and work on it?
A great question.
I'm imagining this is a scenario where you are flexible enough to customize things before you've signed a contract and collected money. Pritz, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like that's the context here.
So I think there's a couple of things. So one, I think what you just asked is a question you asked them. Hey, we want to do this. We're excited to do it. Once we complete this, are we in contracting phase? Once I do this and I show you that it works, what happens next? And if they say something like, well, I don't know, we still got to go think about it. It's like, well, wait a minute. In fairness, I'm about to put 3 engineers on this project, which we're happy to do. But, does it seem right to you that the answer I'm getting is, well, we'll see?
Yeah.
Right? Because they know they're not being fair. That's question one. The other question then becomes, depending on your product, your service, and your organization, that level of customization feels like a paid proof of concept. Right? It's a 90-day paid proof of concept. It's not a hey, free trial. There's a big difference between those things. And so it could be a business decision your organization needs to take a look at a more holistic approach. Because you're right, you tie up resources costs you money. So.
Yeah, I'm with you, Richard. I'd say unless it's a super early startup, I would want some sort of commitment before putting in any sort of extended customization time.
I'd even go so far as if it's a super early startup, because the person you're working with knows it's a super early startup, I'd at least be willing to ask, yeah, we'd be willing to do that, but we need a paid proof of concept. Now it doesn't mean that they have to do it, but I'd at least be willing to ask.
Yeah.
Right? Because they know what they're getting, right? So you need to find some level of value I need case studies and quotes, and I need a paid proof of concept, and I need this, and I need that. Like, I need like 6 things before I just go do that as an early stage startup. Cool. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. I saw John may have a question, so if he comes back in, we'll come back to it.
Okay.
So this is what we're going to talk about now. We're going to talk about the respect contract. How do I earn the right to ask questions? And how do I do that in a meaningful way that's genuine, sincere, and supportive? And yes, this is 100% the script. Now, does it need to be Richard's script that you're about to hear and see and role play? No, but it's a script. And the reason I want everybody to understand this, and I know people hate scripts, feel free to go into the chat and tell me you hate them, you love them. But I want to talk about why they're good. So feel, if you love scripts, great. If you don't, it's okay. We'll prove you wrong. It's okay. So scripting does a couple of things. One, it allows you to practice over and over and over again so that it doesn't sound scripted. There's a difference between having a script and sounding scripted. Very different things. Right? There's a difference between reading something and then committing it to memory so much that you don't ever have to think about it again. And I listen to people do scripts, or people who say they don't use scripts, but they all say the exact same words. And I see the front things coming in. Yeah, it's a roadmap or a framework, or I like bullet points. Bullshit, it's a script. I guarantee you at different parts of your sales process and pitch, you say the exact same thing every time, period. So it might be a mini script, but it's a script. So one, they make you sound good. Two, they actually make it easier for you to think freely and to listen. It's very hard to talk and listen at the same time, especially if I'm having to rewrite everything I say every time I say it, right? Probably 80% of what you've heard today, probably fairly scripted at this point, right? You may not know that, but it is.
So I can attest to that. It's almost word for word from last time, which is impressive. I can tell you've done it a couple hundred times or thousands.
Yeah, you know what? I should go take this recording and the one from last time, and if someone from Chorus is here, see if they'll tell me. Let them run a case study on how scripted does the trainer sound, or how much of a script does he use.
Well, it doesn't sound scripted, not at all, and that's to your point.
Yeah. So I want people to understand that, right? And most importantly is it allows you to think freely. It allows you to take that moment and actively listen. It gives you that moment where I'm talking, but I can still kind of quickly look at the chat, and you don't necessarily know. You might see my eyes do it. Some cases you might see me fall off my script, but I come back, or you don't know it at all. So this is why scripts are really, really important. So now, I want all scripts to be authentic. I want them to be your phrases, your words, your tone of voice. Look, I grew up in the Deep South. I was just working with someone yesterday, and we had to add into her script the word thank you. Very simple. And I could tell she was uncomfortable with what I'd given her as the original script. And I said, what if we add thank you at this one part? And she's like, that's what I'm missing. That's authentic to her, right? I know that. I know that about going into the South, going into the Northeast, coming out West. There's just different cultural things you need to be mindful of. So in this instance, as we run through what I call a respect contract, right, we're going to talk about this respect contract in the instance of it's a scheduled first meeting. I've had an SDR set up the meeting, or I've set up the meeting and it's going to be a first meeting. And these are the elements we're running through. We're going to talk about time. We're going to talk about reasons for the call. We're going to have an agenda. We're going to talk about potential results. We're going to talk about next steps. We're going to come to an agreement on this. And then the most important thing is we're going to have a transition statement. How do I come out of this script and move into qualifying and discovery mode? Because that's the part that I think people teach this type of stuff that they forget. They forget that you got to transition out. And so how do you do it in a way that makes it easy for this conversation to occur? So a couple of quick questions. So one, we're going to run through this. I'm going to role play this as a sales rep. I'm going to put it up on the screen so you can see it. And then we're going to take about a 15-minute break and let people go and write their own respect contracts. And by all means, we're going to come back and role play them. So that's the really critical piece, and that'll pretty much, that should be bring us to the end of the day over the next 45 minutes. So still feel free to keep putting questions and stuff in the chat if there's other stuff that's lingering from earlier, but this is where we're going to spend the next 45 minutes, right? So Colin, will you jump on with me? Will you be my customer?
Yes, sir.
All right. So Colin, in this instance, you are buying sales training, and then your name's not Bobby, but we'll go with it for now.
My middle name's Robert, so we're not far off.
Really? Colin Bobby?
Yeah.
That's like a
You know what's funny is my first name was Robert, and they changed it to Colin because they didn't want people calling me Bobby.
I gotta take a picture of this and send it to your parents. So, all right. So, hey,
it's
Colin,
okay.
how
Call
are
me
you?
Bobby.
Yeah. All right. So ring. So, Colin, how are you?
I'm good, Richard. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, I've got us down for 30 minutes today. Does that still work for you?
Yeah, 30 minutes is good.
Great. Any hard stops I need to be aware of?
I do have a hard stop, yes.
Perfect. So here's what we're going to do. At 25 minutes, I'm going to set a timer, and we're just going to call a timeout, and we'll discuss where we go from here. Is that okay with you?
Sounds good.
So, awesome. So just so you know, the only goal for this call for me today is I just want to put some parameters around the conversation and just create a mutual frame of reference for each other, right? Want to maybe ask you some questions, learn about what you're trying to accomplish, and then of course I want to answer any questions you have. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's okay.
Any particular questions you'd like to ask me today, just so I know ahead of time?
Yeah, I definitely want to find out how much it costs.
Yeah, more than happy to talk about commercial terms when we get there. It's super transparent, but yeah, we'll definitely cover that.
Cool.
So, and by the way, Bobby, if at any point you feel like I'm not the right person, please feel free to say so. I promise you're not going to offend me. And likewise, if I discover something that doesn't fit in my wheelhouse, I'll be the first to tell you. And that way, I don't have to worry about following up, checking in, reaching out, touching base. Is that fair?
More than fair.
Great. And then the last thing I'll say is, look, if we do decide it's not a good fit, I'll even try to point you in the direction of some other people I know, because we all sort of know each other in this space. Is that cool?
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Great. So, Bobby, what made you want to have this conversation? I know you sent an email in that said, hey, you've got a team of 6 SDRs and 5 AEs and you want training, but what's really driving the conversation at a high level?
Yeah, we hired a lot of people and we've been falling behind our targets. And so I feel like we just need some more horsepower to train the team.
Great. So horsepower, that's good. What does that mean for you?
Well, to be honest with you, I have 50 reps today and they all complain that they don't have enough training and they're not hitting their goals. So we want to be able to eliminate that excuse. And we've heard good things about you.
Of course, you've heard good things. Thank you. So I'm going to pause right there. That's a respect contract, right? I probably went off it a little bit from my own script, but the context is there. So I want to pause for a second and see what I want to sort of go question, paragraph by paragraph, right? As you look at the time, what are the things that people noticed about that? And feel free to put it in the chat, or if you can unmute and jump in, go for it.
I had set the unmute thing the way it was supposed to be, but I will turn it off right now so folks can jump in. I think we had some background noise before. You guys should be able to unmute right now if somebody wants to jump in.
So several confirmations. Yep, there's a couple of confirmations in there. What else did anybody notice about the first paragraph? Yep, I'm being respectful of their time, Liz, 100%. How many times has anybody ever been in a sales call and you got to the end and you ran out of time? Yep, there it is. Give room for the discussion, right? So I literally will set a 25-minute timer on my phone. And two things will happen. One, we'll either keep going because I'll say, oh my gosh, there's the timer. We need to pause. Where do we have to go? Or where do you want to go? Sometimes they'll actually, no, let's keep going. Let's talk for a few more minutes. Well, that's all I needed to know, right? Gives them the green light. Other times if it's a good conversation, They're gonna be like, yeah, I want to keep this conversation going. Well, good. Now you have 5 minutes to figure that out. Right? Okay, next week, do you want anybody else there? Do you want me to send an invite? You want to do a Zoom? Like all those things that just take time. That's what we're doing in that first paragraph. The most important thing that we're doing there is we're actually asking for the next meeting. I'm 30 seconds in and I've already asked for a second meeting by saying we're going to determine what next steps look like. 30 seconds in. So, second paragraph around goals, if anybody wants to jump in before I sort of overly explain it. Any questions or comments?
I particularly like that part, Richard, because, and it's interesting doing this as the example, because I think I gave you probably the typical answer, which is not very specific. And I think it's because we, as a buyer, right, for training, we don't usually have a very specific answer. And so I think what you're doing there is what you talked about earlier. It's forcing us to really think about that.
Yep. So, and you'll notice that the goals and the agenda paragraph blend. So when we go take this ability to go and have everybody go write their own and come back and role play it, they're going to blend together, which is pretty normal. So don't be surprised if that happens or you get confused. The goals of the call, in my opinion, are to just create framework and learn about each other. The agenda is you're going to ask me questions, I'm going to ask you questions. I very specifically do not bring up pricing because I wanted Colin to ask, right? And then I was also very strategic in how I responded to that, is that I don't have pricing conversations. I have discussions around commercial terms. Commercial terms is a very important phrase for me because it now implies that there's a negotiation. It implies that you're going to pay X and get Y. If someone uses the word pricing or budget, they're trying to commoditize me. And I need to pull them out of that commoditization mindset just a little bit by using that phrase, commercial terms. So that's very specific. That's why I use it. There's a couple of places in here where some people are like, Richard, I hate using that phrase, mutual frame of reference. It's okay, don't use it. I don't like the word commercial terms. Okay, don't use it. They're strategically placed in there because of what they do, right? Mutual frame of reference means we're just having a discussion about the discussion and we're going to figure out where we need to go and see if we should go forward. That's what a mutual frame of reference is. And so it allows me to take a little bit more control and direction of the conversation, but still allow them to ask anything they want. So that's how this happens.
We've got a good question from Selena, Richard.
Yeah, go for it.
In a previous meeting, I was speaking with a doctor, and when I talked about the second meeting, she stated that I can follow up with her front office manager to complete any further follow-ups needed. In other words, she's handing the sales process off to someone else. Would it be better to push for a meeting with the doctor again?
I don't know that I would push for the meeting with the doctor, but I might say, so does that mean that we're making a decision to move forward? Like, you know, I might ask the question of, hey, I'm happy to follow up with who you suggest, but what's the decision-making process between you deciding yes and that? Right? Like I think you need to explore the decision-making process a little bit.
Yeah.
But certainly understand what's going on, right?
Yeah, Selena, I've sold to doctors before, and it's very common that they want to kind of screen something out, and if they think it's good, they'll hand it off, and they'll say if my office manager loves it, they have the decision-making power to follow through. But to Richard's point, just make sure they confirm that so that you don't get stuck going through 3 more calls, and then the office manager says, well, I have to get the okay from the doctor, and then you're back to square one.
So Colin, I'm going to drill down on that a little bit. So what other kinds of things do you need to be doing when you're talking? Because I don't sell to doctors. What other things should you be asking the doctor then to drive towards that decision coming from the doctor?
Yeah, so their buying processes, first of all, in private practice and even group practices is very different depending on the specific scenario. They could have an office manager who is their 16-year-old daughter who files papers in a filing cabinet, or they could have an office manager who's been working with them for 50 years, and they trust them to make every single decision. They have the credit card, they buy things, the doctor could care less. So you have to really figure that out. And so what always worked best for us was just simply asking, the last time you purchased something similar to this, what was the process like? Is the doctor involved the whole time? Or do you just say, hey, I like it. If our office manager likes it, they can buy it, they can sign the contract, they can do that. It's okay to ask them that. And once you figure that out, you can repeat it back to them, say, okay, so just to confirm, you like what you saw today, we're going to pass it over to Barbara, the office manager, and if she likes it and she wants to move forward, she has the authority to sign the contract, do all of those things, follow through. And then once you confirm that, then I think you're good to move forward. Otherwise, if not, then you might want to push back a little bit to keep the doctor involved, or to ask when he or she would need to be brought back into the process. You just want to know what you have to do going forward.
Yeah, you're dealing with the C-suite, right? You're dealing with the C-suite, the end user a little bit, right? Goes back to that other example. So just what is your process like? How do you like the process? How can I respect your buying process, right? I understand you want to go to the office manager. If it ever gets to that point where we go 2 or 3 weeks and I haven't heard from somebody, what should I do? I don't want to disrespect you or your process, right? So I think talking about the process makes it easier to figure that out.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments before we move on to the next piece?
That's all we've got in here now.
All right. So here's what I'm gonna do. I want to take a break for 15 minutes. I want everybody to, I'll leave this up on the screen. I want everybody to go and write your respect contract. If you want to go word for word, verbatim, I'm okay with it. If you want to rewrite it, I'm okay with it. We're going to come back in 15 minutes. And in that, feel free to go chime in. We're going to have you come off mute. We're going to role play it a couple of times. So if you want to volunteer, feel free. And I promise you, if you volunteer, it'll be way more fun than if I have to do this again myself. Maybe I'll make Colin do it. But anyway, I'll let you guys go for 15 minutes and we'll meet back here.
Richard, can we give a quick reminder of how folks can access the recording? We've had a few questions.
Yeah, I'll be putting it up. I'll be putting it up in online, and I'll be getting an email out today and tomorrow with the 2 links to the videos.
Okay.
All right, everybody, I'm starting to come back. So I see some chat going on. I love the Google spreadsheet. That's awesome. Someone created a Slack channel for me last time. Went really well for about a week or two, and then people died off on asking questions, but I'm happy to create that. And I'm not a huge Slack guy, so if someone wants to figure out how to log in and change it to a better name, let me know. I'm happy to do that. So, going to give folks another minute or two, and then we'll go ahead and get started. And of course, who wants to volunteer and run through their respect contract? I promise we'll be gentle and it won't be bad. You'll walk out of here feeling really good about it.
We have Liz.
Yeah, let's go with
Can you
Liz.
volunteer?
We'll probably get people to do one or two. Go ahead. Let's go ahead. Let's go forward with Liz.
Let me get Liz unmuted here.
Yep, I'm not on mute. Can you hear me?
Oh, good. Yep.
Hey, Liz.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
Good. My husband thinks very highly of you. He's been trying to get me to have you mentor me for a while now.
So, but tell him I won't mentor him, just you.
I think he met you in Costa Rica, Michael Johnson.
Oh, yeah, of course I know Michael. Yeah. So Michael came to Surf and Sales, everybody. Come check out surfandsales.com. Once we can travel again, we'll be going. Colin and Aircall actually even sponsored it and sent a bunch of people. So,
Yeah.
All right, Liz. So let's go through. So give us all a little bit of background so we understand where this is coming from. You know, who are you selling to in general? You know, what role do you want me to be as the buyer? And then we'll start the role play.
Vice President of Sales Operations. So I sell a planning platform for planning, budgeting, forecasting.
Got it. Okay. All right. So we'll assume that there's been a first meeting that's already been set. So this is that first meeting. So I will go with it whenever you're ready. Hello.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for
Hi.
taking time. Thanks for taking the time to meet with me today.
Sure. My pleasure.
I know we've got about 30 minutes. Does that still work for you, or do you have
It
a hard
does.
stop?
Yeah. I'd like to keep it to 30 minutes, but thank you.
Okay, perfect. I'll just make sure we leave about 5 minutes just to discuss next steps.
Okay.
Before we jump into things, I just want to make it clear that my goal is just to establish a mutual frame of reference for each other. But I'd love to understand what you're looking to get out of today.
I think that's pretty much the same. I want to understand what it is you guys can offer and as it relates to what we're doing and understand cost structures and those kinds of things.
All right, great. Well, I'd like to learn about your business and ask some questions. And of course, I'll share what we do and answer any questions for you as well. And I say this to everyone. But at any point in this conversation or future conversation, you feel like we're not the right fit for you, please feel free to let me know. Likewise, if I discover something about your business that doesn't match what we do here, I'll gladly let you know. Does that sound fair?
It does. Thank you.
Great. And the last thing I want to do is, bug you with emails saying checking in, reaching out, touching base, and those type of calls. And, I know you hate getting them and I hate making them. So before we end today, I just want to make sure we decide together what that appropriate next step would look like. Is that fair?
Totally.
All
Thank
right.
you for saying that.
Well, can you give me some background just on your role and responsibilities?
Yeah. So my background is, we'll pause there. So that was awesome. So Liz, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you think you did?
A 9. There was some stumbling. I talk fast, so highlighting the pauses actually really helps me.
Right. Yep. I would say a 9 at least. I would agree with you. Have you used something like this before?
A little bit. I actually did it this morning with a guy I had talked to a couple different times, but I used the last mini contract. So basically my champion is getting changed. They're changing hands. So I did the last mini contract and said, hey, I know you hate getting these emails. It was really difficult for me to work with Aaron on this. And he laughed when I said, I know you hate getting these emails. I hate making them. So
Yeah.
I thought it added some really good humor there.
Yeah, it works really well because everybody knows that it happens and nobody wants to do it. It also sets you up so that when you do have to go through a breakup email cadence or sequence, which we'll discuss tomorrow, you now have a reference point, right? We both agreed this wasn't going to be a good fit. We'd let each other know, and you don't want to get these terrible, terrible emails. That was really, really good. What was anything different than what you normally do?
I feel like I don't set enough time at the beginning to get through some of this stuff. So this was really helpful for me, because one thing I tend to just try to get to the point really quickly. So I do have to remind myself to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
So adding things like the goals and then the potential outcome to give them an out, because just like you had pointed out, is I hate just having people just stop replying to me.
Right.
I'd rather hear a no than for someone just to ghost me. So I think giving that permission is really helpful, that I haven't done in the past.
Yeah. No, that's great, and I think that's the whole point. And here's the deal: they're still going to ghost you. But the important thing is you can walk away going, well, at least I know if they ghost me, it's not my fault, it's them, right?
Yeah.
So that's the important piece. Um, One of the things I was curious about, and it could be industry related, right? You jumped into, instead of saying, hey, what's making you take this call today, which in my mind takes me into a pain funnel, right? You said, tell me about you and your background and your role, which I'm not opposed to, but it just takes you in a different direction. And I'm curious, what, from your perspective in your industry, what made you want to go in that direction?
It was just typically a question that I asked just to kind of use as a level,
Mm-hmm.
just leveling things out, just figuring out what part of the organization people are coming from. Do they do any of the planning? Are they the doer? Are they the ones that are just kind of looking at analyzing the data? How much of them are actually going to be in the tool?
So in your mindset, you're sort of trying to establish some level of access to authority.
Yep.
Yeah, which is fair. Like I have there's no right or wrong here. It's just I was trying to see where you were coming from with that, which I think is great. That's really, really
But
cool.
I did ask enter your other question just in my script, because I do like having that next question being, what made you want to take this call today? But I think for what I do, it is helpful just to know what they actually do and some of their responsibilities.
And totally fine. There are many industries and even cultures where that's more important than the pain, right? Where you have to get to know the person. And I'm totally fine with it. My only suggestion there is, and it came out open-ended sounding, but you sort of asked a closed-ended questions. Can you tell me a little bit about your role and responsibility? Right? That's a little bit of a closed-ended question. I mean, technically it is. I think it gets interpreted in an open-ended way. And I'm not saying you need to change it. I just want you to be mindful about how, because we all say this, we all do it. Can you tell me this? Can you tell me that? Can you help me understand? Right? And it's
Yep.
not right or wrong. It's just be mindful of, might there be a different, better question to ask? Not always, but might there be? Um, any questions you want to ask me about it, Liz?
No, I mean, are there any other examples of good transition questions that you've used?
You know what? I've so committed this to memory to say what makes you want to take this call today that I don't look for them, which is what made me pause on yours and go, oh, wait a minute, let me explore where the mindset was for that, because it stoked a curiosity in me. So um, before we go on to the next one, and we'll ask for another volunteer. Hopefully, someone will come in. I want to make sure people understand. So this is a respect contract where a first meeting's been set. You can have a second respect contract where it's the next meeting and it's the same person. So in that instance, you're not going to have, hey, if it's not a good fit, let me know, blah, 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 right? But you should still have an agenda and goals for the call. You should still ask them what their goals are for the call or their agenda items. That in either case, a little bit of the respect contract whether it's a first meeting, second, or fifth meeting, can be sent ahead of time. And I don't mean in the calendar invite, but I would be sending the message that says, hey, Liz, looking forward to our next conversation. Here's what I've got for a little bit of an agenda. Cover this, cover this. What else would you like to make sure we cover? Even just sending that email sends a message about how Liz will do business as an organization and her organization, as opposed to just what Liz does. So those little things, because I have tons of meetings with people, I never get an agenda. Maybe it shows up in my calendar invite, but I rarely read those. And then if I do, I might read it, maybe when it pops off 5 or 10 minutes ahead of time, if I'm already not knee deep in 6 other things. So I'm a big fan of breaking this down in lots of ways, right? You have a respect contract for a first meeting, second meeting. If someone new is coming to the meeting, right? You've had a respect contract, with Colin. I've had one with Colin, and now Colin's bringing in 2 other people. I'll go through pleasantries and introductions, and I'll say, hey, still got us down for time. By the way, Colin, you've already heard this, but I'm going to tell everybody else too. Look, everybody, if y'all ever feel like I'm not the right fit, just say so. And likewise, I'll be the first to tell you, Colin already knows this. So be able to have that into a second conversation when more people are coming into the next conversation. You can take this and build it into something for your customer success team. I change it. There's a pretty big tweak. I don't call it a respect contract as much as I call it a fairness doctrine, because in a customer success role, you're never going to say, hey, if this isn't a good fit, let me know, and likewise, I'll tell you too. Like, we're never going to say that. Like, they're already our customer. But you might want to say, hey, Colin, as we learn to work together, if something's not clear or something's not working the way you were expected, please tell me, because I want to make sure I handle it. And while it's known that that's what you should be doing in customer success, there's something about saying it out loud that builds more trust, right? That they know they've got, that Colin has their back, right? So, so there was a question of an agenda in a first in an email. Yeah, I can actually show you one. This is what goes out. Come on. Of course, now everything's going to start dinging. Bear with me. You can screenshot this if you want. Not my inbox, but this email. My kids are all playing Fortnite, so internet's slow.
I guess, Richard, just as a follow-up, because I am looking at what I've done in the past, and usually I do start kind of like, introduction, relate, position, like, hi, I'm Liz Johnson with N.E.A.T. I've bought all the Anderson windows for my new home. Really just looking to get a better idea of, what you're looking for. So I guess, how do you fit in the introductions a little bit before this respect contract?
So it's interesting. I don't do introductions in my respect contracts. I don't do, oh, let's go around the room and tell each other about everybody. Because frankly, I think it's a big waste of time. I think people kind of care and then they kind of don't. I can see industries where it does matter. I do think that you could take what I'm showing on the screen and put that in there, put everybody's LinkedIn profile. If I've got 4 people that I need to go around the room and do introductions on, if I'm not careful, that entire first 10 minutes of the conversation is wasted on introductions. So that's a personal belief to me, and I don't do it. But I'm not going to tell people not to do it just because that's how Richard believes it, right? But the bigger the group, the longer that's going to take. So you'll see that in this email, this is what goes out before I have a meeting with somebody.
Hey, Richard, you got the wrong slide up.
What do I have up?
Respect contract.
Oh, hold on. So do a different share. I'll blow this up if I need to. Is that it? Do you see the email?
Yeah, it's there now.
Okay. So this is, if someone sets a meeting with me, this is what they get, right? You look, the subject line alone, it's a proposed agenda, meaning they can change it. This is what every first meeting I think is, right? We're going to go through some level of introductions, understand the state of the company, answer questions, determine next steps. And then I actually include my deck and my syllabus in my email. So this is a way to use a bit of that respect contract ahead of time. I can even start them down the transition statement. I'll still run through literally my respect contract as you see it on there, right? As much as you heard me say with Colin, I would still go through that entire thing, even if I've sent them this. So I'll see if there's any comments or questions around this, because it usually does tend to generate some level of discussion. And yes, it's templated.
Here we go. Selena says, I'll play devil's advocate here. I sometimes wonder if an entire respect contract is necessary. Sometimes I'll get the doctor or manager on the phone right away, after a few follow-up calls, that is. And then they tell me, now is a good time. Do I just go into my spiel?
So I think you have to experiment with it. You have to A/B test this a little bit. I would still be a fan of saying, thank you, doctor. I appreciate your time. Hey, just so I don't ever waste your time, I'm going to take 60 seconds and put some parameters around the conversation. Here's my goals. Here's what I want to do. I don't want to waste your time and send a bunch of checking in, following up emails. My gut says that I would still do it, but I would test it, because to your point, industry matters. Fortunately, we have Colin on the call who's sold into this industry, so I'll also let him give some feedback too.
Yeah, so I understand the context here. So when you're reaching out to physicians' practices, their schedules are not very predictable. They can go through waves of being extremely busy to waves of patients didn't show up for their appointments and they have nothing to do. Or they had a lot of phone calls coming in that they weren't expecting, and they also have 10 patients waiting in line waiting to check in, right? So it's a little bit different than calling on the C-suite who's just working off of a calendar. They're rarely double booked, things like that. So sometimes you get them on the phone at the right time and they're like, yep, now's a good time, let's go. And you want to capitalize on that time. So what I did is we had sort of a mini script, a little mini talk, a little mini pitch that we would use in those scenarios, because we bet on the fact that even though they said now's a good time, in 5 minutes it might not be, because that another wave of customers or phone calls comes through the door. And so we would start with something small that was predetermined, pre-scripted for that specific scenario, and the end goal was just to get enough interest that we could put a real solid block on the calendar, for the future when we can actually get time on the doctor's calendar. And Selena, I imagine if you've been selling to doctors for a while, you've been doing this, but if not, one of the best ways to get FaceTime or even just time on a calendar is to offer to buy them and the office staff lunch. The one thing that they have to take a break for every day is to eat. And if you offer to order food from their favorite restaurant, it's not a new trick. It's the oldest trick in the book for selling to doctors, but it's usually a good way to get them to set aside some time for you, because they have to eat when that food arrives. And so if they agree to talk to you while they're eating, then you've got some time that you can cover everything.
Cool. All right. I'm going to shut this down and reshare a different screen. All right. How did that get moved? All right. Anybody else want to jump in and do their respect contract? I promise it's gentle. Liz did a great job.
Yeah, very good job, Liz. Hadi. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Is it Hadi or Hadi? But I think you can unmute
It's
yourself.
Hadi. Yeah.
Hadi.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Yeah. So thanks for agreeing to do this. Mine is very similar to yours. To be honest, I've tried many of your techniques, so I'm just gonna go off the same script. It's almost 9:30 p.m. here. Please excuse the the stops. I'll go right away into it.
No worries.
So hi Richard. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
Good to talk to you, Hadi.
Thank you. I really think we have around an hour for this meeting. So I just wanted to let you know that I will be stopping 5 minutes ahead of time so that we could discuss the next steps. Is that okay?
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to, before we start having the discussion and introducing myself around what we do and why we started this call, I just want to make sure that we kind of have a mutual agreement around how we're going to be speaking moving forward and how we're going to be taking it.
Okay.
Does that sound fine?
Yes.
Thank you. So I just want to, I just want to take you through the agenda, discuss how we can have some questions answered for both sides. I want to know a bit more about what you do, share a bit more about what we do, and then we can, determine next steps from there.
Sure.
Thank you so much. I really, I just want to put this on a limb here, and please don't take this the wrong way. But if at any point in time you feel that this is not the right discussion for you, I will definitely, I would definitely prefer that you give me a straight no instead of having to go through the circles of, not getting an answer from you and having to follow up with you. And I will do the same if I see that that we're not the right fit for you. What do you think?
I think that's great. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you. So I just, this is, to be honest, that's what I prepared for now.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. So aside from the fact that you're, literally doing this on the world stage, and aside from the fact that it's the first time you've rolled through it with me or anyone out loud, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you think you did?
7.
Yeah, I'd probably give you more like an 8. Like, don't beat yourself up. Nobody's going to walk away from that conversation because this didn't go super smooth, right? Nobody's going to be like, I'm not spending my time with you, Hadi, goodbye, right? And if they do, then you didn't want to talk to them anyway. But I don't think that's going to happen at all. So give yourself more credit. I think you do want to write it out and practice it about 5 or 6 more times before you do it with a person, with a prospect or a customer. But do it out loud with someone in your house, a friend, coworker, whatever it is, because that will help you get rid of that choppiness, right? The part we hate about scripts that I've learned is that we hate the choppiness of them because we haven't committed them to memory. So that would be my only suggestions. How does that compare, Hadi, to what you've currently been doing though?
Look, I've tried to take some of that already, and with the agenda being sent out separate, with having to stop with the 5 minutes before ahead of time, I've done that since the last month.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely this kind of puts more of an accountability on the other person's shoulder. Look, there's a person on the other end that you're speaking to. I'm not just some random salesperson who you're never gonna hear from again. I'm gonna be sending you another email, and I'm pretty sure that you don't want this other email and this follow-up, because nobody wants to be chased. And trust me, it's not fun on the other side either. I don't want to be chasing you either. So this kind of puts that not only like respect contract, but it puts you on the same level. In the sense that, hey, I'm not chasing you. I'm not running after you because I need you. I'm trying to contact you because we have something that we can offer here, and it's a mutual kind of it's a same or level ground, if you like to say.
Got it. No, good. Well, I'm glad, and that's you're exercising a muscle. That's really, really good. Any questions for me about this, Hadi?
Thank you so much. That's it from my side.
Thanks, Hadi. Great job. We've got a question here, Richard, from Wally. He's very new to sales, and he's looking for, can you recap or reiterate, how do you follow through on your respect contract?
Wally, can you explain what you mean by follow through? Meaning, what do you do next? What do you do after?
I think he
this?
means, how do you make sure you stick to it? Wally, correct me if I'm wrong. I think he means, how do you make sure, in other words, if they say they're going to take the next call or they agree to something and they ghost you. Is that what yes, that's what he's asking.
Gotcha. Okay. Great question. So I have a whole other email. So I have the pre-meeting email that you saw. I have a post-meeting email. Let me see if that's in this document. Hold on. Let me see if I put that down here. Yeah. So I think we're going to cover this a little bit tomorrow, but I'll go ahead and bring it up today. This is very small. I know that. Can you see this email?
Yes.
Okay. So to your point, you'll notice the subject line up at the top: Risk Safety Solutions, Harris Consulting Group, next steps, call notes, additional resources. Again, a template that I have pre-written. Hey, Safa, great speaking with you today. Could you please use this email as a summary of our conversation? If you feel I missed anything or misunderstood anything, please let me know. I'm happy to adjust. So now I'm trying to drive some accountability to them. I took some advice from John Barrows on this one, and that last sentence says, instead of saying, if you feel I missed anything, it will now say, could you please do me a favor and respond and let me know if I captured everything correctly. So now I'm actually putting some accountability. They need to respond. It doesn't mean that they will. I then immediately have my next steps. Even though I sent them my syllabus before, I still send it again. I think I've added like my G2 crowd reviews on here, and I've added something else, my customer page. I then have challenges and training. For me, I talk about the sales structure. I have, because I need to understand in my world what's their ICP. I do have timeline. So all these things that are in bold, that's already templated out. The first bullet is already there. So literally I can just start typing as I talk to people. This actually helps me make sure I ask the right questions. By having the timeline there, it reminds me, oh, I need to ask them about timeline, right? By saying sales team structure, I'm like, oh yeah, tell me about your team, so that I don't start talking about myself. So I send this email, and it's designed for a couple of things. It's written one so it's easy to do. It's also written in a way that's easy for them to find based on the subject line. And then it's also supposed to be very easy for them to forward to the next person. So if this has got to go back to the team, hey, everybody, here's what Richard and I talked about. So now I'm making sure the message is getting through clearly, right? In a way that they want it to be done, or in a way that it needs to be done, but in a way that I think is helpful for everybody. So I do this post-meeting email. They will still go dark. But again, when I do go back and connect with them, then I just reply to this same thread. By the way, there's actually a new bullet point under next steps. My fourth bullet point actually says Richard to reconnect on blank date. And that reminds me to ask them, when are we reconnecting? So that's what that's there for. So I try to use this as my own sales process.
Okay, because I just wanted to ask this question because the company that I work with, their sales cycle is like about a month or two. So I just want to make sure that, we don't have to, whenever we reconnect with the customer, like we don't have to explain them everything what might have happened, through the process, because once the customer closes the deal, it gets handed off to project management from sales. So there are some details that always get missed, or the customer is getting back to us on, this is what we talked about. So that's just the thing that I had on my mind to ask.
So I'm confused. So are you saying that in your world, how do we drive accountability after they become a customer? Or so I'm confused.
So, okay. So this is something which I want to do, or I want to make sure that I do when I'm closing and getting the customer signing the deal, and
Right.
then before passing it on to the project management.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the part where it actually happened. Like, I finalized some details with the customer, like, and when it, went through the project management and the project was done, we do home improvements, right? So when the project was done, the customer actually came back and said, this is not what we talked about. And all of that was like lost between the handoff. So that is something that I want to make sure that we define everything with the customer before they even approve anything, and make sure they're on the same page just by putting everything in writing.
I would agree with you. I would totally agree with you that you need something like this to make sure you've captured it right so that you can drive some level of accountability to the
Right.
customer. In your world, sort of selling that kind of stuff, I could also see the homeowner not necessarily sort of agreeing that even though you sent it, that they agreed to it. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a legal document. So, but I think you're on the right track.
Yeah.
That if there's a leak in the funnel and that leak is around that, then yes, this would help plug that leak. Something like this.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for asking. All right. 10 minutes left before we end for the day. I'm happy to give everybody 10 minutes back in their day, but if anybody has a general question, you want to role play, or you're like, hey, Richard, what about this? Or what about that? I actually have one scenario that I will mention to everybody. Go for it.
We've got a couple questions on a similar subject here. They're both a little bit different, but I think they're high level. They're the same question. When you're dealing with large enterprises, existing accounts where you have long-standing relationships, you're already selling them a certain product, you're managing the relationship. How do you apply this framework to working on upselling or finding new opportunity?
Yeah, so I think that I think you'd be very direct with it, and you might try to reframe it as a fairness doctrine, like I said, around customer success, right? But to your point, I could reach out to Colin and say, hey, Colin, I'd love to talk to you about 2020 initiatives, and maybe get on the, if I'm understanding the question correctly. Hey, Colin, good to catch up with you today. Goal is to share some stuff we're doing. I want to understand what you're doing. You're one of our best customers. As we go through this stuff, if something's not aligning with what you're thinking, or you feel like this isn't what you need, just say so. Like, I hope you know me well enough, but I do want to remind you, it's okay to say so. You're still my customer. I'm still going to take care of you. So I find a way to say it like that, assuming I understand the question the right way.
I think that's answering it, but folks, if it's not, please feel free to chime back in, or you can unmute yourself if you want to jump in as well.
So nobody's asked me this question, so I'm going to answer the unasked question, which is, what happens, Richard, if you've scheduled a 30-minute call and you start to run through this, and they say they've only got 15 minutes, right? They don't have 30 minutes. What do I do? Right? It's very possible. Hey, do you have any hard stops? Someone says, you know what, Richard, I only have a hard stop. I only got about 15 minutes. So a couple things you need to do. One is, you still run a respect contract all the way through. You don't shorten it. This respect contract's about 60 seconds, maybe 90, give or take. Okay. So whether you got an hour, 30 minutes, or 15 minutes, you do the entire respect contract. The second thing is, you do have to decide, can we have this conversation in 15 minutes? So in my mind, so my calls are always 30 minutes. But if someone says they've only got 15 minutes, I have outlined a different process. I've written it down, I've committed it, I've practiced it. And even though I've written it down, there are often times where I'm like, yeah, this isn't going to be 30 minutes. This can't be done in 15 minutes. So I would tell you that you need to say, you can't do that. Can we reschedule? Now, look, if it's Coca-Cola calling, I get it. You may need to run the 15-minute call and do the best you can, right? But the best you can means you've scripted out the right kinds of questions. You know who this person is. You've done your research on them. You've done the research on the company. You've done a decent enough job to understand why they're talking to you. And you make sure you ask the right open-ended questions on how to move forward. So, which is where we're going to pick up tomorrow. But so you should have, 15-minute pitches or 15-minute conversations, 30-minute conversations, and hour conversations sort of scripted out so that you know what you're doing. So
Richard, you mentioned
Yeah.
someone named Charles earlier when you were talking about negotiation. Can you tell us more about that?
God, I do remember saying that. What was the part I was supposed to answer then? What was the question?
I don't remember. I think they're asking is Charles someone they should be researching or following? I think that's the question here. I don't know if you used an example. I might have missed that.
No, I said, hey, there was a context of using the ego states and
around the child-adult negotiation.
Around the child-adult. And so the goal is that if you've done a good respect contract, you can navigate that conversation better, right? If I've done this respect contract is my nurturing parent tone. I'm leading them down a path, right? They still have a lot of control. They can take this wherever they want, but ultimately I'm going to be able to wrestle it back if I need to. And so setting this up allows us for negotiations later that all of our conversations have been mutual, where we're on an even playing field, right? So, believe me, I've been through respect contracts and people are like, well, Richard, can't you just tell me what it's going to cost us? I don't have a lot of time today. And I have to be willing to say, that process doesn't work for me. I appreciate your ask. It's a fair ask, totally fair for you to ask anything you want, but that doesn't work for me. And if that means this isn't the right relationship, that's okay. Like, you can go find someone else. But I would also turn around and say, but Colin, just out of curiosity, how do you want your own salespeople to answer that question? Right? So I'm in a world where people can push me, and my best answer is, well, how would you want your own salespeople to answer that? Would you want them to give in? And the answer is no. So I live in a world that's unique in that way, that it caters to me. And everybody backs. As soon as I do it, they all back off. They're like, you're right. Or they like to think they're special.
Yeah, I know when I was shopping for training, it was so interesting to see the sales process of the trainer trying to sell you on their training. We've got a couple questions here.
You never even approached me, Colin. And that's a true story. I didn't even know you were looking for training. So,
we never ended up buying any, by the way.
It's because you didn't talk to me.
It is. It definitely is. We've got a couple questions here. How does this whole process work for in-person selling? Does it differ?
I think the words differ, but I think it's the same thing. I think there are places where you can look someone in the eye across the table and say, hey, look, appreciate the time, looking forward to it. You're probably not going to go down. You're probably going to have to rewrite, hey, I've got us down for 30 minutes, right? You're going to have to tweak that a little bit, but I still acknowledge it. Hey, I want to make sure, you've got something after this, so I'm going to keep this to 30 minutes. It shows a sign of professionalism. So I keep that piece there. I do think you can acknowledge, face to face, hey, look, at some point in this conversation or another, we're going to get to a sort of are we moving forward or not? So if you're decided you're not going to move forward, and you have to look them right in the eye in this one and say, it's okay to tell me, I promise, right? Like that's where you make the most eye contact. So I think it can all be done. You would tweak it just a little bit though.
By the way, Richard, my laptop might die any second. So if I sign off, guys, that's why. We've got some more questions here.
Yeah.
What do you say when large enterprise contact says, can you give me a rough number or range for budgeting?
Yeah, I would say, our pricing starts here.
If a customer says our businesses don't match, I'm assuming this means we're not a fit. How do you respond, Richard?
Great. Just so I understand, because I want to get better at my skill, what makes you think we're not a good match? I'm probably answering it a little bit more critically sounding than I should, but so don't do what I just did. I'm aware, I'm being self-aware. What else?
Let's see. Sorry, I dimmed my screen here so I don't die. Richard, you mentioned, oh no, I think that's it.
Okay.
I think that's it.
So I want to say, first of all, thank you to Colin for giving up his time. Tomorrow we're going to have another gentleman joining us, Blake Hudson, who, if you haven't met, Blake is awesome. He was just on the Surf and Sales podcast. If you haven't followed Colin or connect with him on LinkedIn, please do. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I know there's that document that's going on, so I love that. So do that. If my Slack thing worked out, great. If not, keep it on the document. I'm fine. Add me to the group. I'm happy to be a part of it and answer questions. And we will talk to everybody tomorrow. I'll hang out for a minute or two in case anybody wants another question.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Colin. Appreciate your time, bud.
Anytime, man. Thanks for having me.